Welcome back, everyone. Is the Quran's account of Jesus historical? Does it reflect what really happened? Is it accurate? These are important questions that concern not only history, but Muslim epistemology. Now, as we've discussed several times on this channel, the concept of the extremely sound transmission, the tawatur, of the Quran developed with time until it became virtually the consensus view among Muslims that all of the Quran was transmitted by tawatur. As such, this means that whatever the Quran says has been transmitted so soundly that it constitutes certain knowledge. If the Quran says it, you can and will believe it as a Muslim. However, it may be that nowhere is such a notion more problematic than in the Quran's account of the crucifixion of Jesus. Surah 4:157 is such a well-known verse that I don't need to read it to you. It is, of course, here that we find the Quran's denial of the crucifixion. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. As a result, the study Quran says, although the verse only directly criticizes a Jewish claim to have killed and crucified Jesus, it is widely understood in the Islamic tradition as meaning that Jesus was not crucified or killed at all. Martin Whittingham notes the overwhelming consensus of Muslim writers from the earliest times onward is that someone else was crucified in the place of Jesus. Since the Quran constitutes the certain knowledge of a mutawatir report, Jesus was therefore not crucified. Such an assertion creates severe problems for any Muslim concerned with what actually happened in the past. This is because historians with various backgrounds and worldviews have come to agree on this. The Quran's denial of the crucifixion in Surah 4:157 is wrong because they believe the crucifixion actually happened. But don't take it from me. Hear it from Muslims' favorite Bible scholar. They love this guy. I mean, everything he says, or that they think he says, also constitutes certain knowledge. If he says it, you can believe it, except for when you can't because he's saying something that doesn't fit the narrative.
I think just about every historian who's really worth their weight would, yes, absolutely. I mean, they'd say more things about Jesus, but that they would agree on. But they certainly agree that he was crucified, and they certainly agree that afterward the disciples claimed he was raised from the dead. Absolutely.
Every historian worth their weight would absolutely agree that Jesus was crucified. Therefore, Allah is not worth his weight as a historian, Muhammad is not worth his weight as a historian, and no Muslim scholars who deny the crucifixion, virtually all of them, are worth their weight as historians. None of these sources can be trusted about the crucifixion, and if they can't be trusted with this basic fact about Jesus, why on earth could they be trusted with anything else? Or to narrow the question down just a bit, what compelling reason could any Muslim give for trusting the Quran's account of Jesus? We'll return to that question later on, but for now, back to Whittingham, who we quoted from earlier. When Muslim scholars discuss the reliability of reports of the crucifixion, their concern is not simply to prove that a substitute died in Jesus' place. Sometimes they also address the issues arising from rejecting a claim apparently based on such a large number of Christian reporters. Does such a rejection undermine Muslim claims to knowledge of other events if that knowledge is likewise based on the large number of people reporting an event? Issues surrounding tawatur are surfacing again. Muslim scholars have realized that reports about the crucifixion could possibly meet the conditions for this extremely sound method of transmission. In this case, you would have a tawatur report, the crucifixion, conflicting with another tawatur report, the Quran's denial of the crucifixion. It's interesting to note that many popular arguments made by Muslims today against, say, the New Testament, like Christian bias, for example, don't have any bearing on tawatur. To see why, take a look at these 4 basic conditions. First, there must be an adequate number of independent chains of transmission. Muslim scholars have said this is anywhere from 5 to over 300 to only Allah knows how many. Second, a reporter must have a sincere belief in the report, which is based on certain knowledge. Third, the original report must be based on sensory perception, not something else like a deductive argument. Fourth, the above 3 conditions must be believed to be true by all transmitters. When we consider how much proof, even extra-biblical, that we have for Jesus' crucifixion, something that, of course, many Muslim scholars had no idea of, as well as the fact that many people saw the crucifixion, you can begin to see the problems this presents. But again, what about Christian bias? Well, perhaps surprisingly, that's not a problem. Note finally that, since a mutawatir report is understood to yield certain knowledge of its own accord, the trustworthiness of the reporters is not a factor, unlike in reports of lesser standing. So regardless of how biased a follower of Jesus was, for example, he couldn't make a Jewish or Roman historian confirm Jesus' crucifixion, which is what we have in the historical record. So this is an interesting problem. As we've seen in previous videos, there's much in Muslim sources to deny Tawatur of the Quran, which Muslims would obviously want to affirm, but they certainly would not want to grant Tawatur status to the crucifixion, which is obviously what they want to deny. Muslims have engaged in some impressive mental gymnastics to get out of this trap that they've set for themselves. So when it comes to the crucifixion, Al-Razi, for example, chose to deny the third condition of Tawatur that we saw earlier. Along with his interpretation of Surah 4:157, he argued that sensory perception of all who saw the crucifixion was altered. He then went on to give an absolutely question-begging, self-serving argument for how sensory perception can still be conveniently trusted in all other Tawatur reports. His treatment of this topic is an excellent example of how a man with great intellect can be reduced to terrible arguments if the ideology requires it. But Al-Razi is an excellent example of this fact. Muslim writers sometimes raise the issue of the transmission history of Christian accounts and the question of their mutawatir status in discussing the crucifixion. But this is not the underlying reason for denying the Christian understanding of the event. But as Ehrman says, this is not just the Christian understanding of the event. This is the understanding of virtually all historians. The Quran is the reason. As long as Surah 4:157 is understood to deny Jesus' crucifixion, this will prevail over other evidence and will be the principal reason why it is believed that so many Christians could have been wrong. Regardless of the smokescreen of arguments, it comes down to believing that the Quran is the word of Allah. That's it. But do Muslims have reason to question this? Yes, we've already seen a few examples. The word of Allah about the crucifixion of Jesus is wrong. Allah isn't worth his weight as a historian, but there are other reasons as well. For example, the Quran offers another explanation, but it only seemed like that to them. And with this, the Quran's substitution theory, we see a very familiar pattern. There are numerous pre-Islamic sources that also have various forms of substitution theories. There are more of these than I care to list or read. I'm just giving you an example of 3 of them. You can pause the video and read them if you like. We now return to that question I raised earlier about trusting the Quran's story of Jesus' life. It's there that we see the same thing as his crucifixion. The Quran's accounts of both are not regarded as historical by any non-Muslim I know of, and they both demonstrably contain parallels in pre-Islamic sources. I'll put some examples of that up at the end of this video. But the Quran's frequent borrowing of this sort of material raises a critical question. In what sense can a book that repeats old tales be considered the word of Allah? And remember, fundamentally, this belief about the Quran is the only reason Muslims have to deny the crucifixion, history, and everything else that they want to in the record about Jesus. I think that's an extremely unreasonable reason. Finally, I want to mention one important practical consideration that follows from this. Muslims frequently believe they have the upper hand in conversation with Christians, and this is because they claim to love and respect Jesus, while Christians don't love and respect Muhammad. But Muslims have no idea who Jesus is. They can't even bring themselves to acknowledge facts about Jesus that are universally acknowledged by all historians worth their weight.
Just about every historian who's really worth their weight would, yes, absolutely.
And until they develop the ability to at least do that, we should continue to, by default, deny the Quran's portrayal of history and give Muslims reasons for doing so as well. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.